I'm Jason Little, and this is 10 Minutes Off the Top of My Head. Today we're going to be talking about alchemy. We're going to look at it a little bit more in depth because it's important to understand science, and you'll see why by the end of this video. I hope that you find this as fascinating as I do because it's very, very interesting. Now let's get into this. Alchemy is actually two words, al and chemi, which al is the, it's Arabic for the, and then chemi is the name by which Egypt was known. The Egyptians didn't call Egypt Egypt. They called it Kemet or Kemet, depending on how you like to pronounce it. And so alchemy came from the Egyptian god Thoth. And Thoth for the Greeks is Mercury. For the Romans, he's Hermes. I might have that backwards now that I think about it. Anyway, for the Greeks, it's Hermes, and for the Romans, it's Mercury. So there was a man, possibly who actually lived, who was named Hermes Trismegistus. And he wrote what is called the Emerald Tablet, which was translated into English by none other than Sir Isaac Newton, who was a huge alchemist. We'll get into all the famous people who were alchemists at another time. Maybe by the end of this video, we'll see what happens. But you have to understand that alchemy is ruled by the idea that by the law, if you will, as above, so below. And you may have seen the Baphomet statue, which depicts this as above, so below, with his hands, and many other representations throughout literature and art throughout time. Now, in alchemy, that's the overriding idea, as above, so below. They believe that there is the one, the all, the divine principle, the Alpha and Omega. This is the thing that we're trying to attain. This is in alchemy what we're trying to understand, and the alchemist's goal is to create the philosopher's stone, the lapis philosophicus, the lapis philosophicus, the philosopher's stone. So in alchemy, you got to start off at the beginning, and at the beginning we have the three primes, the tria prima, sulfur, mercury, and salt, which represent the spirit, the soul, and the body. Sulfur, mercury, and salt. Sulfur is masculine. It is the omnipresent spirit of life. The mercury is feminine. It's the fluid connection between the high and the low, the fluid connection between the high and the low, mercury. And then salt is the base matter, the inner fire. And so this is spirit, soul, and body. Now, in alchemy, you have four elements, the primary principles as they're known. There is fire, water, earth, and air, and they're all opposites. Fire is opposite of water, earth is opposite of air, and they're represented by triangles. Fire is a right side up equilateral triangle. Water is an upside down equilateral triangle. Earth is a right side up equilateral triangle with a line through the top of it, and then air is an upside down equilateral triangle, for crying out loud, equilateral with a line through the bottom of it. And then we have the seven primary metals, and they are gold, silver, copper, iron, tin, mercury, and lead. And they're represented by and dominated or influenced by seven planets, starting with gold. And yes, I do have notes. It's a complicated subject. Gold is represented and dominated by the sun, and its symbol is a circle with a dot in the middle. Very important to understand these symbols because you see them everywhere. Whether you realize it or not, they are all over the place. Alchemy is alive and well today in all of the world. It's something that is practiced by illuminists. By the way, let me go back to Hermes Trismegistus for a moment, because Hermes Trismegistus is a very interesting character. And he wrote the Emerald Tablet, which is not very long. It's not like it's 10 pages long. It's like 4 or 5 paragraphs, I think, three to 5 paragraphs long. And it gives you the founding ideas and principles behind alchemy. Now, Hermes, of course, was a Greek god, the messenger to the gods. And he corresponds to Mercury in the Roman and Thoth in the Egyptian pantheon of gods. And Hermes Trismegistus means 3 times magnificent Hermes, right? Okay, so there's a philosophy out there called Hermetic philosophy. And this is what these guys are following. So when we look at this, we have to understand that this stuff is part of enlightenment. It's part of the they that we were speaking about in so many videos in the past. So gold, the sun. Gold is dominated by the sun. It's the masculine. It's also represented by represented by the sun, dominated by the sun. It represents, in us, it represents energy and life to everything, sense of self, willpower, organization, self-integration, energy levels, vitality, and success. In the body, it dominates and influences the heart, the spinal column, vision, distribution of heat in the body. The moon is the feminine aspect. The sun is the masculine aspect. The moon is the feminine aspect. The moon is silver, and the moon dominates silver. And silver represents water, growth, fertility, conception, emotions, instinct, subconscious, psychic phenomenon, collective consciousness, rhythms and cycles, genetic and cultural heritage. So this is what the moon or silver influences. And silver, the base metal, is dominated or influenced by the moon. In the body, it influences and dominates our brain, the female organs, stomach, all fluids in the body. So we see that kind of correlation with the moon that we believe influences our tides in the world. Next one is copper. It's influenced or dominated by Venus, and it represents, or it affects, influences, dominates herbalism, magic, arts, music, poetry, design, theater, harmony, proportion, integration, meditation of opposites into a whole, odors, perfumes, and love. Venus. Venus influences or dominates the skin, kidneys, perspiration, sexual organs, smell, transformation, enrichment of substances within the body. Iron is Mars, dominated by Mars, and it dominates intent, violent energy, which brings dynamic energy to all it encounters, increases in psychic ability as well as motion and power in the physical realm. It influences or dominates the muscular system, male sex organs, the marrow, blood formation, adrenaline, purging of the body to maintain health. Now, if you know anything about science at all, you know that it's interesting that we see these elements that we've already looked at and what they affect in the body, and we know that it's true in medical science that these elements are present in these things. And so we continue here. Jupiter dominates or influences tin. Tin is good health, good health, wealth, philosophical and religious matters, ceremony, and enjoyment of life. It influences or dominates the liver, the arteries of the stomach and abdomen, digestion and assimilation of oxygen, nutrition, antibiotic functions, cell growth, and general energy levels. Mercury. Mercury, the planet, dominates or influences Mercury, the metal, and it dominates and influences communication, commerce, initiation into the mysteries, alchemy, Kabbalah, astrology, magic, writing, transmission of information, nerves, dexterity, mental skills, and speedy distribution of energy. It influences or dominates in the body nerves, speech, hearing, coordination between thoughts and speech or actions, growth, thyroid, nervous system, spinal fluid, and spinal fluid, I should say. So that is Mercury. Then finally lead, which is dominated by Saturn or influenced by Saturn, and influences or dominates old age, chronic disease, learning, karma, teeth, spleen, hair, minerals in the body, joints, and flexibility in bones. So there you have it, the seven primary metals that are influenced by the planets. Now, alchemy is a process, and we're going to go a little bit over 10 minutes here because this is important. This is where it all begins to, we see the connection between alchemy and science right here. There are the seven 7 operations of transformation. And again, we're talking about transforming gold or lead into gold, which is really a base human into a spiritual being, the gold. The lead is the base, the gold is the what we're looking for. And let's get into that here. The 7 operations of transformation. Number 1, calcination, which is heating in a crucible of an open flame until it is reduced to ashes. Heating a substance in a crucible in an open flame until it's reduced to ashes, which is represented by vitriol or sulfuric acid. The destruction of ego, the attachment to material possessions, the fire of creation. And so the process begins with this calcination process, which is simply taking a substance and sticking it into a crucible and heating it up until it's reduced to ashes. And they did this with sulfuric acid, reduced it to ashes. And it represents in us the destruction of ego, attachment to material possessions, and it is the fire of creation. After calcination, you have distillation, which is the dissolving of the ashes of calcination, which creates rust, sulfuric acid, and iron oxide. These are the first 2 of the arcana or secret ingredients. It is represented in alchemy by the Great Flood, and so we have this dissolution, dissolving, if you will. So then we go on from dissolution to separation. Once you've dissolved it, you got to separate it. These are scientific principles that are adhered to today. Calcination, dissolution, separation. Separation is the isolation of the components of dissolution by filtration. And from this, you get sodium bicarbonate. And this is in alchemy, as it affects the earth, this is the formulation of the land mass by the working of the 4 elements. Conjugation is next, or conjunction rather. Conjunction is the recombination of the separated elements to form a new substance. Potassium nitrate is what represents this in alchemy, and it's known as the lesser stone. So the recombination of separated elements. Now in the mystery schools, when you get into this portion, and there's a lot more to this. I'm really just covering the scratching the surface of it. There's a lot more to it. But this is the part when the adept, you're initiated with calcination, and then you become adept in the conjunction. This conjunction is where we get the idea of sex magic. Now, sex magic is so evil and devious and rotten and disgusting. And we're getting far afield here, and I don't want to really get far afield, but it's all related. These mystery schools, they were alchemists. They were pursuing the advanced spiritual science. They were absolutely pursuing alchemy and doing alchemy. After conjunction is fermentation. It's a 2-step process. The putrefaction of the hermaphroditic child from the conjunction results in its death and resurrection to a new level of being. Now this gets really complicated, but here's the idea. In conjunction, you have the recombination of the separated elements. In fermentation, you know what fermentation is. You know what it is from wine. For instance, you ferment the grapes. So you have the one substance. It's a 2-step process, putrefaction, and then you have the introduction of new life into the product of the conjunction to strengthen it and ensure its survival. And this was represented in the alchemy by liquor hepatis, or ammonium and hydrogen sulfate, which is also known as the liquor of the liver, represented by the color green. And all these things are represented by colors also. I don't have all that for you. But it's the balsam of the soul. Then you have, after fermentation, you have distillation. Distillation is the boiling and condensation of the fermentation to increase potency. And the element, or the thing that represented this in alchemy, is called black pulvis solaris, black sun dust, if you will. Black antimony, or purified sulfur. Beezer, as it's also known. And then after this, you have the final thing is coagulation, which is precipitation or sublimation of the purified fermentation distillation, red pulvis solaris, pure sulfur, and red mercuric oxide. So you have these things that happen. You have to go through these processes. And as much as it's a process of science, scientific principles being put into physical actualization, it's a process that the soul goes through. Calcination, dissolution, separation, conjunction, fermentation, distillation, and coagulation. These are processes that are carried out in science today. And why I said that alchemy is the forefather of science, and it is the truth, I believe. Disagree with me in the comments below, but please bring some facts and give me reasons why. So when we understand this, that alchemy is advanced spiritual science, and we begin to put together all these things that we've been looking at. When you look at CERN and you look at the spiritual implications of CERN, it has something to do with alchemy. There is something to it. Now, let's bring this all down out of the ethereal cloud level back to earth and to some practical applications of this. When we look at science, science has become a religion called scientism. And you see this demonstrated clearly by people who will say, science says thus and such. And they always appeal to science. And people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, always appeal to science. Science tells us. Science says. And we see these things over and over again. And we hear these statements being made over and over again. It's very interesting, isn't it? Well, we'll cover that on the next video. God bless you. See you on the next video.